Pratiksam Naram Shaivam Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Yasam Tato Jayam Udidaya Nasta Prayeshu Abadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Namashloke Bhakti Bhagavati Naistiki. So this morning we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st Canto, 5th chapter, text number 30. Right? Gyananam Goyatamam Yat. As they were leaving, those Bhakti Vedantas, who are very kind to poor-hearted souls, instructed me in that most confidential subject which is instructed by the personality of Godhead Himself. Purport, or repeat. As they were leaving, those Bhakti Vedantas, who are very kind to poor-hearted souls, instructed me in that most confidential subject, which is instructed by the personality of Godhead Himself. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The pure Vedantas, or a Bhakti Vedanta, instructs followers exactly according to the instructions of the Lord Himself. The personality of Godhead, both in the Bhagavad Gita and in all other scriptures, has definitely instructed men to follow the Lord only. The Lord is the creator, maintainer, and annihilator of everything. The whole manifested creation is existing by His will, and by His will, when the whole show is finished, He will remain in His eternal abode with all His paraphernalia. Before the creation, He was there in the eternal abode, and after the annihilation, He will continue to remain. He is not, therefore, one of the created beings. He is transcendental. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that long, long before the instruction was imparted to Arjuna, the same was instructed to the sun god, and in course of time, the same instruction, being wrongly handled and being broken, was again instructed to Arjuna because he was his perfect devotee and friend. Therefore, the instruction of the Lord can be understood by the devotees only, and no one else. The impersonalist, who has no idea of the transcendental form of the Lord, cannot understand this most confidential message of the Lord. The expression, most confidential, is significant here, because knowledge of devotional service is far, far above knowledge of impersonal Brahman. Jnana means ordinary knowledge or any branch of knowledge. This knowledge develops up to the knowledge of impersonal Brahman. Above this, when it is partially mixed with devotion, such knowledge develops to knowledge of Paramatma, or the all-pervading Godhead. This is more confidential. But when such knowledge is turned into pure devotional service, and the confidential part of transcendental knowledge is attained, it is called the most confidential knowledge. This most confidential knowledge was imparted by the Lord to Brahma, Arjuna, Uddhava, etc. Verse again. As they were leaving, those Bhakti Vedantas, who are very kind to poor-hearted souls, instructed me in that most confidential subject, which is instructed by the personality of God Himself. Mukam karoti vachalam pangam longayate girin yatkari patarham bande Shri Guru Dinatarane. So even Narada Muni is talking about his past existence, probably in another kalpa. This shows that even great souls can have dark pasts, or unusual, or past lives. The Goswamis, the 6 Goswamis, who are considered some of the most elevated souls in about 500 years ago, were engaged in the government, which at that time was under Islamic law. They even had Islamic names, and they were supposed to have adopted many of the Mohammedan habits. Yet Lord Chaitanya said that they were eternally very elevated people, and they propounded many scriptures. Jiva Goswami's Gopala Champu is considered, says Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the foremost writing of Vedic literature. So these are not ordinary people, Rupa and Sanatana Goswami, even though they had Mohammedan past and Mohammedan names. Even Narada Muni had a past life as a very humble servant of the maidservants of devotees, and he is talking about this here. Even when Lord Chaitanya was present on the earth, he sometimes acted in an ordinary way, just to keep pace with the standard program. He was thought to be a very ordinary person by a lot of people. When he was going from Jagannath Puri to tour South India, he said that he was going to search out his elder brother, Vishwarupa. He knew that Vishwarupa had passed away. So this was considered a kind of pretense. Krishnadas Kaviraj uses the word pretense in a verse in the Madhurya Lila. I think it's in the 7th chapter. He calls it a pretense. So even great souls sometimes act ordinarily. When Krishna was present on this earth, he acted in a very ordinary way. He acted like an ordinary child. Part of the reason why he was able to do this was that he was, as it said in many scriptures, an expert actor. He could cry real tears. He was very fearful of his mother. He did played childish pranks on various people. In many ways, he acted like an ordinary person when he was a young child. And even when he was older, sometimes he acted in an ordinary way. Even the personality of Godhead, what to speak of great souls, acts in sometimes ordinary ways just to keep people, to show people, especially Lord Chaitanya, to show people that God is not ordinary. In another way, it shows that everything that we see in this material world has its origin in the spiritual world. And the spiritual world is in its pure form, whereas in the material world, it's in its perverted form. But every emotion, every thing, every device, every thought, every thing that we can perceive has its origin in the spiritual world. One of the things Krishna states in the Bhagavad Gita is that all glorious, opulent, glorious, beautiful and glorious things are but a spark of my splendor. I think that's in the 10th chapter. Srimad Virjitam Eva Bhava. But everything that we see around us is coming ultimately from Krishna, the source of everything, of all energies, of all existence, the source of all existence. And as Prabhupada writes in this purport, the Lord existed before this world was created, and even after this world and everything in it is annihilated, He will still exist. He is very, very wonderful. Sometimes even the Hare Krishna movement is criticized because we seem to act in an ordinary way. We have a building, we have grounds, we have a beautiful settlement. So in some ways it appears ordinary. There was a comedian in the United States called Johnny Carson. He had an evening show. It was on every night on television. And one night, he hosted a very famous country and western singer. The country and western singer's name was Willie Nelson. Some of you may have heard of him. Even though many devotees tried to become guests on that program, they were unable to. And it seems that the host of the program had sort of a thought that the Hare Krishnas were some odd cult, something that should be made fun of, that could be made fun of, could be joked upon. And he said this to this country and western singer. Said something, I don't know, somebody sent me the clip. I didn't see it myself originally, but I did see the short video clip. And he said something negative, Johnny Carson did, about the Hare Krishnas to this famous singer. And the singers replied by saying, well, there's good people and bad people in every religion. And that was the end of the discussion. There were no further negative comments about the Hare Krishna movement. So it's kind of true. Somewhere it was said that ascertaining the truth is sort of like picking raspberries. If you approach it from one angle, you miss something. Who actually said that was kind of an unknown person, or maybe it was someone in Canada, maybe it was a movie actress. It's been attributed to different people. The ascertainment of truth is like picking raspberries. If you approach from one angle, you miss something. The meaning of this is that truth is multifaceted. And one of the things I think that endeared people to Prabhupada was he was clear that the truth was multifaceted. He didn't seem like a fanatic who thought this was the only way. He knew that there were many enemies, even of the Krishna movement. There was even a plot to murder Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Fortunately, it was uncovered. It was discovered by the police, and the perpetrators were punished. Or I don't know exactly what happened. But the idea is that no matter how pure a person or a thing is, there are always going to be inimical forces. Some of you have maybe seen that on the internet. There's a few sites that are very critical of leaders of the Hare Krishna movement, of the Krishna movement in general. And the church, which has been in existence for or a couple of thousand years, the Roman Catholic Church, also has a lot of detractors and enemies. When Srila Prabhupada was lecturing, one of the governors of Alabama, I think it was a state of the United States, was shot with a gun and maimed. After this incident, Srila Prabhupada said that he was going to refuse to appear in public any longer. But alas, and it was our good fortune that he didn't make good on this promise. He did appear in public many times. Also, I heard that I think it was in West Bengal somewhere, near Calcutta, there's a group of thieves and very sort of criminally minded people called the Naxalites. When Prabhupada and his devotees were chanting in that area, from what I've heard, these Naxalites were very rowdy and threatened to beat up the devotees in Prabhupada, and I heard even fired gunshots that missed all the devotees. I don't know if this was before or after the incident of the governor of Alabama, Governor Wallace. At any rate, Prabhupada continued to make public appearances, even though there was a lot of opposition. One of the things he instructed us is that there's always going to be opposition. This goes back for many years, the idea of opposition. Prahlad Maharaj is a Nitya-Siddha devotee. He was considered a pure devotee by many people. And yet his own father attempted to murder him in many ways. He was unsuccessful, fortunately. But he tried to murder his own father. So there are enemies always, and they can be close by or far away, but there's always going to be enemies. And this is a thing that Prabhupada writes about incessantly. He's taught us. Early on, we discovered that there was another branch of, you might say, Krishna consciousness or Hinduism called impersonalism. Srila Prabhupada goes to some great lengths to say that impersonalists are inimical to Krishna consciousness. He even at one point calls them atheists. But on the other hand, we know that people, or most of the people of that part of the world, when they engage in Brahman or in personal realization or monism, it's that they are taking a step towards Krishna consciousness. Some of them, on some rare occasions, have even become Vaishnavas. There's the case of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who we read about in Chaitanya Chaitamrita, who was a very advanced scholar in monism. He knew many scriptures by memory, and he could recite them just like the wind. And somehow or other, he was very impressed with Lord Chaitanya, even though he knew that Lord Chaitanya was a sannyasi who was initiated by someone in a lower caste, by the Bharati. Keshava Bharati initiated him originally, and Keshava Bharati is a member of the Shankarite class. Even so, he relented, and in the end he became a Vaishnava. He became a very great devotee of Lord Krishna. Prabhupada says here in this purport something that's very hard to understand for newcomers, in that you have to be a devotee to understand Krishna. It's even said in I think it's the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Bhakti Mama Vijanati Yavam Chashmi Tattvataha, that only by devotional service can I be understood as I am. In other words, we have to engage in some form of devotional service, whether it's gardening, cooking, worshiping the deities, driving trucks, repairing cars, whatever it is. That devotional service is what makes it possible to understand what Krishna is. This is a teaching that made it possible for all of us, including myself, to understand that Krishna consciousness would be possible for all of us, even though we might have had dark or unsavory pasts. It was very encouraging. Very early on, I attended a kind of a field trip. Prabhupada took a group of devotees to what was called Monroe Ashram. Monroe Ashram was a place in upstate New York State, run by a man named Dr. Mishra, who Prabhupada was very friendly with. Unfortunately, this Dr. Mishra was a die-hard impersonalist. Nonetheless, Prabhupada was very friendly with him. They ate together, they talked together, they had jovial discussions, they went on excursions together. But when it came down to philosophical discussions, Prabhupada was unrelenting. And we learned that I learned anyway, that there is a very strong disputational or conflictual relationship between a Mayavadi and a Vaishnava. That there are two schools of thought, basically, in what is now known as Hinduism, Vaishnavism and Mayavadism. And Prabhupada exhibited even anger to show that he went philosophically, that he was opposed to impersonalism. Because that, according to what he's taught us, is one of the strongest philosophical enemies of Vaishnavism, to be an impersonalist, to think that I can merge with oneness, and that is the ultimate position, that Brahman is the highest level of creation. And that pretty much is the thought of the goal of all, not only Hinduism, but Christianity, Judaism, Mohammedanism, everything else. Everything that goes under the name of religion thinks that God has no personality, that God is a force or an energy. When I was attending a Jewish Sunday school, the instructor told us that we shouldn't think of God as a person. When we're small, we tend to pray to God as though God is a person, that he has a personality, that he has feelings, that he has thoughts, that he has emotions. But later on, I think I was about 14 years old, I was taught by someone who I respected a lot. It was the teacher who was always right, and the students were, always taking notes and thinking that everything they said was right. I was taught that God is, the more advanced way to think of God is that God is not a person. God is a force or an energy or a non-human being. This was one of the things that made Krishna consciousness very different from everything that had been learned before. I was always attracted in my youth to so-called spiritual people, rabbis, mullahs, priests, and various people. I always, however, found that there was something missing in everything that they did, said, and taught. There was something missing. Either they were too liberal or too conservative. Something, this wasn't right as far as I was concerned. when Prabhupada first appeared in the West, he spoke in a very unusual treatise that God was a person. In fact, everything he said was sort of against the grain of materialism, and it was very hard to digest. It was very hard to see that these things could be actually true. But because of the personality involved and the nature of the vibration of Prabhupada's personality, his early followers accepted what he was doing and what he said anyway, even though they didn't necessarily think it was right. They just thought that, well, this is probably the best of everything. So it's not how deep the philosophy is, but it's by the nature of the vibration of great souls that one is elevated in Krishna consciousness. It is said in the Mahabharata, Mahajana Svapak Panta. It's a famous verse that says that all of the truths of the scriptures are nestled within the hearts and minds of the great souls. Mahajana Yena Gatasva Panta, the Mahajans. That they are the people who are the ones who attain the absolute truth. This is kind of common in everything, that we observe all truth as being in the minds and hearts of great people. In the material world, people have role models. They're their parents when they're young, they're rock stars or sports stars when they're older. Whatever they are, they function on what these people say. They set the pace, so to speak, for everything that exists. What we have learned in the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam is that there's a personality behind everything, and that the God has a personality, and that he can be worshipped. So the verse again says, Narada Muni is saying, he's reiterating his past to Brahma. As they were leaving, those Bhakti Vedantas, who are very kind to poor-hearted souls, instructed me in that most confidential subject, which is instructed by the personality of Godhead himself. In England, I found out that people, when they want to write a letter that no one else should see, they write on the envelope, private and confidential. So somehow this term, confidential, Prabhupada latched onto and used to say that this knowledge is the most confidential. Srimad Bhagavatam is very confidential. And if you consider that there's some 6 or 7 billion people in the world, and yet there's only maybe at the max a few million or less than that devotees, they are the confidential part of knowledge. They're doing something that's very, very small, very secretive, and very confidential. And even though Prabhupada has said in purports in the Chaitanya Charitamrita and in Srimad Bhagavatam and various other places, that the whole universe will be liberated by Krishna consciousness, we face, in Kali Yuga especially, a world that is very addicted to sense gratification. So even though Krishna consciousness may be very small, it's very potent. Prabhupada once used the example of Karl Marx, and he said that his writing, the Communist Manifesto, was considered kind of an odd thing. And yet it became, for the Bolshevik people in Russia, a way of life for almost 70 years, communism. So I'll probably have to end here and see if there's any comments or questions. Yes?
Class in the word for word, the Dina Vatsalas translators, those are all very kind to the poor and the meek. I'm just thinking, normally in the material world, nobody aspires to be poor or meek, but is this something, qualities that devotees should be aspiring for, or is it just even those who are poor and meek, Krishna is kind to?
I'm not sure I understood what you were getting at.
To be poor and meek is considered sort of in the material world quite negative. Nobody wants to be in that position. but it seems Krishna is very kind to those who are. I'm just thinking, are these qualities we should be aspiring for?
Well, I think Prabhupada has used the word poor-hearted to mean people who aren't just destitute or homeless, but they're people who don't have Krishna consciousness. That's what he says poor-hearted tends to mean. We find that people who, have found that people who are materially poor or homeless or, at the low end of the social ladder tend to be a little bit more spiritual and are more accepting of religious thought than those who are affluent. At one point, a devotee came to Prabhupada and said that he wanted to start a temple in a place called Beverly Hills. Beverly Hills is the very extremely opulent part of the world, of Los Angeles. And Prabhupada went on to say that it's not a good idea. He said it wasn't such a good idea because the more opulent people are, the less they're attracted to Krishna consciousness. So that may be part of the reason.
I think in the Bible it mentions the meek shall inherit the earth or something like that.
I think that's the actual quotation, the meek shall inherit the earth. I think it's from Matthew or one of those books.
Yeah. So I guess that's talking about humility in one sense.
Yeah, meek and humble in a sense is a very multifaceted term. Meek and humble. You can be meek and humble even though you're very wealthy. But generally that's not the case. Blessed be the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. I think that's the exact quote. So that's a kind of encouragement that even though we may be poor from a material point of view, we can be very wealthy from a spiritual point of view. And that means in inheriting the earth. Like the great Raja Rishis, they were very poor in a sense. They were very humble and meek, but they were rulers and they would punish criminals. They had to do unpleasant things, but they were also very humble people. So it's a kind of multifaceted thing, what humility is. You can be outwardly humble and inwardly, like Prabhupada himself was very, very direct and very strong when it came to combating impersonal philosophy. But at the same time, he was very soft. I think it's said that sometimes the devotees can be hard as thunderbolts, or Krishna himself can be hard as a thunderbolt and soft as a rose. And we know that in the hands of Vishnu, there's a chakra and a club, and as well as a flower, a lotus flower. So that's possible. Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj. I have a question. You said about this is all about secret knowledge. I was wondering, we were just up in Cairns recently on a Sankirtan trip. We met some devotees there, and they practice in their homes, but they don't really go out. And everyone we met, they said, "Oh, we haven't seen you guys around so long." So is there a danger in being too secretive and not going out enough? And just being too, because I don't know, Prabhupada wanted us to go out.
Prabhupada has written, at least on 3 or 4 occasions, that apart from book distribution, preaching is our most important activity. So the belly button gazers, so to speak, are people that are not preaching. They're only inspired by their personal advancement. It's in a different category, and according to what Prabhupada has written, it's not something to aspire to. It's good, but it's not the best. And he's, as I said, has said that preaching is our, and he approved of the saying in the Sankirtan newsletter, preaching is the essence. Even though he didn't write it himself, he approved of it. He saw that the weekly Sankirtan newsletter that had that at the top. Preaching is the essence. Books of the basis, etc. There's even a story that on one Ekadasi day, this actually happened, it's not just a story, but it's an incident, that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati in his ashram saw that, that a few of his ashram dwellers were just laying around and not doing anything. And he said, if you have to eat grains, but go out and preach. That's kind of a one-off thing. It's not to be taken that grain should ever be eaten on Ekadasi, but that emphasizes how important preaching is.
Mm-hmm.